Hello, everyone. First of all, welcome and thank you for joining our Electrification Academy. Today, we will talk about industrial flexibility. We will get into this topic in just 1 minute. But before that, let me tell you a bit about us. So, RAP, the Regulatory Assistance Project, is a global independent NGO. We advance policy innovation and thought leadership in the energy community. And one priority for us is electrification. And this is why 5 years ago, we set up the Electrification Academy at the time with the Copper Institute. Our goal with this series of webinars is to look into innovative electrification business models. We want to understand their potential, and we also want to look at the policy framework that we need to make progress on electrification. My name is Marion Santini. I've been with RAP for more than 5 years, working on energy efficiency and heat electrification. Today, I'm joined by my colleague Jaap Burger. Hello, Jaap.
Hello.
Jaap is a senior advisor at RAP, where he focuses on many topics, including flexibility and the smart charging of electric vehicles. We decided to start this series of webinars with a topic which is becoming very trendy and super important, and that is industrial flexibility. I'm based in Brussels and I follow European politics very closely. A couple of weeks ago, the European Commission has launched a very important initiative called the Clean Industrial Deal. What's important is that in that strategy is to ensure that industry can decarbonize while at the same time increasing its competitiveness. Electrification is central to these efforts. So when we started to look at industrial electrification, what we found is that there is a huge potential for industries to get revenues for providing flexibility to the electricity grids. Now we still need to understand a few things. What industrial processes are we talking about? Which ones are flexible? What revenues are we talking about? Is it worth it? Is that significantly improving the business case for electrification in Europe, in other regions of the world? So before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to let you know that our session today is being recorded. You can put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the page. We'll get back to these questions after the two presentations, so please stay with us. Now, let me welcome our speakers on stage, Surbhi Singhvi and Mathilde Chareyron. Hello, Surbhi. Hello, Mathilde.
Hello, hi all.
Nice to see you. So let's first introduce each other before we move into the presentation. So Surbhi, you are a manager, heat decarbonization and renewables at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Could you tell us a few words about what you do at WBCSD?
Happy to. Good day, everyone. And it's a pleasure to be at the Electrification Academy. Thanks a lot, RAP, for having us here. In my day-to-day job, apart from what my title explains, I work with our business member companies, and these are businesses that are across the globe, in looking at what the common challenges are that they are facing with respect to heat decarbonization and renewables uptake. And we support them by producing collective insights into solving some of those challenges and working with them in thought leadership on various solutions that exist that can support them in overcoming those challenges.
Thank you very much. I'm now turning to Mathilde Chareyron from Sympower. Mathilde, could you tell us about your company and what you do as a head of public and regulatory affairs?
Yes, of course, Marion. Thanks a lot for having me, and hi everyone. So Sympower is actually like an independent flexibility service providers. So we have a IT platform, a software that helps mainly industrial customers to monetize the flexibility on balancing markets in different countries in Europe. I will maybe explain a bit later on how this works. And as head of public and regulatory affairs, I'm in charge of the advocacy, so making sure or trying to improve the regulatory framework in which the company evolves, trying to get supportive policies. And as Sympower is active in many countries in Europe, we're also in charge of making sure that we comply with the regulation, that we monitor regulatory changes to be sure our company software is up to date and helpful also for our customers.
Thank you very much, Mathilde. So now we will move into the presentation section. So I remind everyone that if you have questions during the presentations, you can pop them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the page. We'll get back to them at the end of the two presentations, unless I notice that there is an immediate need for clarification. In that case, I will let our speakers know. So let's start with Surbhi. So Surbhi, we've asked you to tell us a bit more about industrial flexibility. What does it mean? What processes are we talking about? Why is it becoming more important? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Marion. I'm just quickly sharing my screen, and please let me know when you see this.
We can see your screen.
Perfect. Okay, welcome everyone. I'm talking about industrial heat and focusing on heat. You will know the reason in a few minutes. Looking at how you can increase industrial flexibility through use of thermal energy storage. For those of you who don't know the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, we are a member-led global community of leading businesses which are driving systems transformation. Our programs are designed to help our members lead in this decisive decade. 2030 is important for all of us. And together with them, we ensure that sustainability remains to be an economic and a strategic priority for businesses. This is just a quick look at the members that at WBCSD's members that span across all geographies and sectors. The strength of WBCSD lies in ensuring that we have companies from across the value chain and we collaborate with them in overcoming some of the common challenges that they're facing in their sustainability journeys. Now, to the topic of the day, industrial flexibility, and there's no typo on this screen today. I focus on industrial heat mainly because if you have to look at how industries can be more flexible, you have to see where industrial energy consumption is coming from and what does it constitute. If you look at the global direct GHG emissions by sector, of course, industry is an important sector there. But if you look at where these emissions are coming from, you would see that heating and cooling constitutes around 80% of that, with space heat accounting for 5% of those emissions, but 75% of those coming from process heat. The rest of the emissions are coming from what we call them as process emissions that are the direct result of chemical reactions during the industrial processes. But because process heat constitutes 75% of those emissions that are coming from industry, if you look at the annual contribution in terms of gigatons of carbon dioxide emitted, it's around 10.6 gigatons, which again, in layman's terms, is equivalent to emissions from two of the largest countries that are emitting, two of the largest emitters in the world, US and India. So that's why I focus on process heat. And within process heat, another important statistic is the fact on how this process heat is split amongst different temperature ranges. For all of you who have been to energy transition conferences, who have talked about decarbonization at work lunches or dinners, of course, industrial decarbonization becomes a very sexy topic. And within industrial decarbonization, we talk a lot about heavy industry decarbonization, as well as hard to abate. We all love talking about it, and that's for right reasons, because you see in this pie chart, the right-hand side, the 54% of the global industrial process heat is coming from temperatures which are above 400 degrees Celsius, and the industries that we call hard to abate, including cement, steel, a bit of chemicals and glass. But I think what gets forgotten or underestimated is the left-hand side of this pie chart, which is made up of processes that are using temperatures below 400 degrees Celsius. And these are the processes that are in the pharmaceutical industry, looking at purifying and isolating ingredients, washing, cooking, frying. In the food and beverages sector, of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but it's these temperatures which are constituting equally important part of the process heat and have to be decarbonized. Equal emphasis need to be put on the fact that these temperature ranges and these processes need to be decarbonized. When it gets to how we are moving in terms of the global heat consumption in industry, we see that there is going to be an increase of around 17% in the global heat consumption by industry over the next 6 years. And the share of renewables is still increasing, but increasing at a much lower pace than required. We're at around 12% right now when you look at renewable heat and the total global heat consumption, and we are expected to move to 16% as per IEA by 2030. On the right-hand side, I've just focused a little bit on what the constitution of the renewable heat is. And this is specifically relevant to the discussion that we are having today on industrial flexibility, because it's electricity, and it's specifically renewable electricity, that is going to be dominating this growth on renewable heat. And given the pressures from the supply side with renewable heat and renewable electricity, as well as the demand side with increased demand for electricity by industries, buildings, transportation, and different sectors, flexibility becomes a key market demand for scaling electrification. And we are already seeing that it has become a valued characteristic across the globe in many markets. You would see it reflected in the grid regulations. If you have a project for which you need additional capacity in the electricity grid, if that project is providing flexibility services as well, the chances of getting an approval are higher. In some places, you would also see reduced grid fees for projects that are providing flexibility, Germany being the case in point. Policy support as well, where you have projects where grants are being awarded for projects. You would see that projects that are providing flexibility services are preferred vis-a-vis projects that are not providing flexibility services. So you have an edge there. And even internally, the business case for those solutions is much higher, and hence you are likely to deploy those energy solutions. So flexibility, a short point here is that flexibility has become a very, very valued characteristic when it gets to solutions that you are adopting or that you're transitioning towards. Now, on industrial flexibility, of course, there are various ways in which industrial flexibility can be promoted. And I know that Mathilde is going to talk a lot about this, and so I won't cover this aspect, but I'll just focus on one specific aspect, which also relates to the work that we've been doing with our members at present, which is thermal energy storage. And WBCSD, along with its member companies who are a part of the heat decarbonization work that we lead, is doing a series of renewable heat navigator briefs, where we are supporting our members in assessing suitability of those solutions and letting them know about the parameters that they have to check to see whether they should adopt those specific solutions at a high level, and also spreading awareness about the projects that have happened on the ground, the lessons that we've learned from them. The recent one that we have released is on thermal energy storage. And of course, there are various ways in which you can store energy in a thermal energy storage system. Heat to heat, if you have a concentrated solar thermal, or if you have waste heat streams, you can actually use that heat to store it in the thermal energy storage system. Or you can use electricity either through the grid or your on-site renewables to store it. Once it's stored, you can actually use either heat as an output, so directly to be used in your industrial processes, or you can use it for generating electricity, which of course comes at a much lower efficiency, but is a possibility. On the right-hand side, you see the three types of thermal energy storage systems. Sensible energy storage system is one of the thermal energy storage systems are the most mature right now, but of course, a lot of progress is happening on latent and thermochemical as well. The one that we've covered mostly is the sensible thermal energy storage system in our work. As I mentioned earlier, we looked at the key parameters that industrial companies should look at to assess suitability, and we did this we divided those parameters into four. The first one being process, and I only have a couple of them here from a long list that's mentioned in the work that we have done. So, of course, I would really encourage you to go back and see the full list. In terms of important aspects on thermal energy storage, you would see that with existing projects, it is reaching temperatures up to 310 degrees Celsius. And for projects that are in the pipeline under construction, 600 degrees Celsius is something that is already being looked at. In terms of the charging profile, for those of you who have looked at other kinds of energy storage, especially battery energy storage, for the short run, you would see that thermal energy storage can allow flexible charging. It can be actually charged intermittently without having an impact on efficiency. So that's a big positive. In terms of location, it has a very small space footprint. And it does require additional local infrastructure. But again, a point to note here is because it provides flexibility, it is generally given preference over other projects that are not providing flexibility. So you're likely to get additional capacity in the grid if you're competing against other projects not providing flexibility. In terms of the LCO edge, it is a lot dependent on the source of heat or electricity that you are using to store in the thermal energy storage battery. But it is in the range of 40 to 200 euros per megawatt hours. Given that we haven't dived down into specific locations, you see a wide range here, but this is already competitive in a number of markets. In terms of round trip efficiency, I mentioned that the conversion of heat into electricity again comes at a much lower efficiencies, but if you're using it as a heat, it is highly efficient. And the big takeaway here is the lifetime of this specific solution that provides companies a good ROI. In terms of, you can actually use the QR code here to scan and access the entire Renewable Industrial Heat Navigator brief. But I want to highlight one of the things that we did as part of the work was to look at all the projects that were already on the ground and that are being implemented right now, to look at what the decisive parameters were for those projects. And flexibility was one of the key decisive parameter that emerged for companies that help them in going ahead with the thermal energy storage project. Of course, they do talk about facing challenges in permitting and grid connection, but like I said, flexibility in many markets is being given priority now, and hence this is something that is increasingly being resolved. I just want to shout out that we already did one brief last year in December on solar thermal. For those of you who are interested, it can be found in the link below. And another one on electrification will be released towards the end of May. I just want to quickly, towards the end, point out one last thing, which is how does an industrial user make use of this in flexibility? It's not the core business of industrial user to provide flexibility to the market. They are in the paper and pulp business, or they are in the food and beverage. That's their core business. But if they join hands with energy utilities or the thermal energy storage provider through a heat as a service agreement, then life becomes much easier, both in terms of the investment that they have to do, the risks that are shared, and more importantly, the risks are shared as per the core business areas. So the energy utility is going to ensure that it's making full use of trading electricity and storing energy at the time that it's available for cheap, and providing energy when it's needed. The thermal energy storage solution provider is going to design an optimal solution for yourself. And depending on whether you like them to own it or just operate it for you, they're going to ensure efficiency there so that your as an industrial user, your core business you're not diverting attention from your core business. But I'll pause here, just in the interest of time, and I'll give it back to Marion. Very happy to take any further questions in the chat as well as afterwards.
Thanks a lot for setting the scene so clearly, Surbhi. I invite participants to put their questions in the Q&A box, and we will come back to these questions after the second presentation. So we hear flexibility is important for the industry partners Surbhi is working with. And now I'm turning to Mathilde, who has a hands-on knowledge about the revenue streams that industries can get from flexibility. Mathilde, we've asked you to share a few case studies of Sympower's clients and to tell us a bit more about the policy framework that is useful to drive these revenue streams. Mathilde, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marion. I will just share my screen. So here. Can you see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, so thanks a lot again for giving me the opportunity to go through our experience at Sympower. So just really briefly to set the scene, Sympower was founded 10 years ago as really like a demand-side flexibility aggregator. So by aggregator, we mean like a company that pulled together resources and therefore megawatts from different assets or customers and then place a bid on the market with this aggregated pool. So we are around 240 now, and we are managing 2.5 gigawatts of distributed flexibility. Most of these 2.5 gigawatts are coming from commercial and industrial businesses. We also are starting to have some batteries in our portfolio, but these megawatts are mainly coming from district heating and cooling, pulp and paper industry, metallurgy, data centers, and so on. Like a short disclaimer, I will be presenting our experience. Like Sympower is active in Europe only. I did look at other frameworks, so I could maybe try to answer some other questions, but really like the cases I would present are really based on on the countries where Sympower is active in. But really briefly, to explain what we see and the reason why Sympower was created is that the electricity grids are really becoming a key bottleneck in the energy transition, because on one hand, we need to have like more electrification of uses, meaning electric vehicles, industrial processes, heat pumps, etc. So this is for the demand side. But on the supply side, we're also shifting to renewables that are more intermittent, and we need to deal with this intermittency. So what we are trying to solve is that with the increased demand and the lower predictability due to the intermittency of the renewables, we'll see more congestion and a need for more resilience. And we do think that this is where distributed flexibility will play a vital role in really balancing the supply and demand that we see as the biggest challenge. So demand response, like for those of you who are not really familiar with the term, is a change in the electricity consumption to keep the supply and demand of electricity in balance. And when I say a change, it can be like increasing, but also reducing the consumption. And these flexible distributed resources being, as I said, light bulb, batteries, also some renewable like PVs, for instance. All these assets are capable of changing their consumption to adjust to the need. And this is where like a company like Sympower comes to play. So in practice, what does it mean? If we take an industrial customer, like they can monetize the flexibility across multiple markets through like an IT platform, as I say, software. So we take
Mathilde,
customers' assets.
sorry to interrupt. Your slides are not moving. You're not in the screen view. Sorry about that.
Oh, sorry, but well, that's surprising. That's a bit annoying, indeed. Let me share let me switch then. I'm sorry for that.
No worries. It's the challenge of
how the
live
slides will not-
presentations.
Yeah, better to use it indeed. Now do they move?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so let's Yeah, let's do it again. But so in practice, like really for industrial customers, what does it mean? It's like we take the different assets that they own together with assets from other customers, and through a platform, so like an aggregator like Sympower, we integrate the resources, we optimize through the portfolio, and we also trade on markets. And this can be energy markets of different types. So for instance, balancing markets, so markets that are already owned by the TSOs, but also we can trade them on wholesale markets. And there are different type of markets. I have another slide to really like show that. Something that really needs to be taken into account is that when we monetize the flexibility, we really need to find the right fit between the industrial assets and the markets where the flexibility is monetized. The reason for that is you're more than aware, like industrial processes cannot be like switched on and off as we want. We need to make sure that we don't have a negative impact on the processes. And so one part of the work, like of my colleague, is actually to really try to find the right fit between the market's requirements, and I will not go through all of them. It can be the speed of response, the activation frequency, the length of the activation, and the assets that we manage, aggregate, and bid. You will see for Sympower, like we operate in different type of reserves, being really fast one, like FFR on the left of the slides, but also secondary and tertiary, which like are often more frequently activated, but also where the speed of response is shorter. Then really just briefly on this, I will not go through all of it, but here I wanted to highlight that balancing markets are not the only way to make revenues with flexibility. In light blue here, you have the markets where Sympower, so the company I work for, operates. We are working on developing also wholesale markets, so day ahead and intraday, but there are plenty of other markets, or yeah, I'd say services in which flexibility can play a role. It's not always like a good fit for industrial flexibility, but this really depends on the assets you have. So there are still plenty of opportunities. Then really briefly more on the case study. So here, this is really based on, the example here is based on our portfolio, but what I want to really highlight is that you can participate in flexibility and let's say different electricity markets with like many different sectors. They can really create value. Our biggest portfolio is in agriculture, like because of electricity bulbs in greenhouses, mainly in the Nordic, but we also have a lot of customers in the pulp and paper industry, in technology and telecommunication, district heating and cooling, metallurgy, energy. So here it's mainly batteries, but also cement. And this flexibility can be spread over the following resources, like electric boilers, stirrers, furnaces, fan, pump, crusher, wind, PV, batteries, and this is really like a non-exhaustive list. So the thing to remember is that there is a lot that can be done with industrial flexibility, and I think it's more like for people to realize that it's possible and then find the right fit between their assets and the markets. Really briefly, so I have a few case studies. So this one is from the mining industry. It's one of our customers in Sweden, and there is a lot of information on the slides, but here, for example, they participate in primary reserve, meaning that they need to respond to the really, really short time frame, but it's almost never used. So what they do is that they're actually getting paid to be available. We call that a capacity payment. And for these specific customers, with 8 megawatts participating in demand response on this primary reserve, like since May 2023, they could raise up to 1.7 million euros annually. And this was from February 2024. So it's in less than a year. This is the assumptions we could make. Another case is from crypto miners and data centers. And Marion, you mentioned the fact that it's a really trendy topic in Europe currently, and data center are another really trendy topic. So we have a client called Seabird Data Services. It's a data center and more precisely a crypto miners. And again, participating in this primary reserve with their HPC and a flexible capacity of a bit more than 10 megawatts. The revenue estimates it's between 90 and 120,000 euros per megawatt per year. In this case, the different assets that we can use are they highly like the computers, the electric boiler they have around, etc. And finally, another case that we have is in the pulp and paper industry. You will see we have a lot of customers in the Nordics, and these cases are always in Sweden. But in this case, they participate with us in 3 different types of market program with a lot of different resources, and they have a bit more than 30 megawatts of flexible capacity. And here again, the revenue assumption is between 100 and 200,000 euros per megawatt per year. And this is the revenue estimation is also linked to the availability that they have, and that they are, of course, because it's a portfolio, how we build their own portfolio. Something I wanted to mention, and here again, it's keeping in mind the fact that we are mainly working in Europe, is that in Europe, like there is a really supportive frame at European level. We have regulation that dates back from 2019 that are really supportive of demand-side flexibility, demand response, and also aggregation and independent aggregation. That being said, we face like really fragmented markets, and that's why for us, I've seen a question earlier about what are the balancing markets in which flexibility can be monetized. That should be in all of them. That's actually not really the case if you want to be able to really work in an aggregated way and as an independent aggregator. What we see, and more specifically looking at industrial flexibility, is that there are really plenty of points that are impeding the development of flexibility within the industry. But on the bright side, we also think that solutions can be implemented without requiring important investments. So some of the main challenges that we see is that there is a highly fragmented EU market, but also that the technical requirements, like how to participate in the markets, really limits the participation of the industry. And there are a few, let's say, shortcuts to take. And in this case, it could be like to transpose and actually implement EU regulation. This will improve market access for independent aggregators like us that could then support industry participation in those markets. The requirements should also be technology agnostic. So it's not a bit like, yeah, maybe it's not super clear, but what we mean is that the requirements should be designed to solve an issue, not necessarily targeting a specific type of technology. Like what you see today is that a lot of these requirements are really targeting, let's say, batteries, and they expect batteries to participate in this market. What we think is that industrial flexibility also has a huge role to play, and we really want to see requirements drafted to answer to solve a problem, not just to allow some specific technologies to participate. And we also think that we should see an harmonization of the grid codes to ensure that, yeah, it's just easier because a company with a plant, I don't know, in Sweden and in Czech Republic, for instance, would already know, like, at least there will be some similarities between the grid codes in these different countries. We also think that financial incentives are not attractive enough for industrial customers. What we would like to see are capacity payments to be implemented to secure revenues. It's very difficult to convince the manager of an industrial site to participate in the markets if they are not sure they will get revenue, because let's face it, they have costs. Like if you switch from a gas boiler to an electric boiler, that's a big investment, and you need to be sure that you will get some extra revenues to make the investment worth it. We also think that fines and penalties need to take into account the uncertainty that are inherent to industrial processes, because you never know. And what we see is that currently in many countries, like they don't take into account this uncertainty. And we have seen it in some countries, like in Greece, where we're active, where the fines are so high that really it's not worth the investments because the risk is too big for companies that want to participate. And the last point is really about potentially like a lack of awareness, depending on the country where you operate. Industrial side, they don't have the same understanding and the same level of awareness. And we think that then it's more about education and make sure that also from the policy side there are some more education done to convince flexibility or industry to participate. I think that's it. I had another slide that's more like a summary, and if you want to share them, Marion, afterwards, I think that will be more than enough.
Thanks a lot. I see questions are still coming in the Q&A, and I would like to thank again both speakers for providing this information and these case studies that are quite interesting when you're trying to understand a bit where the business case currently is. My colleague Jaap has a question for both of you, actually. And while he asks that question, I'm going to look at the Q&A and I will prepare for questions from the audience.
Okay, thanks, Marion. So a question to both of you, and it's a two-part question. So maybe you want to answer one or both parts of the question, up to you. So what major changes do you expect both in the business models as well as in the policy framework in the coming years as more industrial processes get electrified? So two parts. So on the business side and the second part on the policy side. Surbhi, do you want to start?
Happy to. On the business model side, I already briefly mentioned in my presentation that heat as a service is something that we are seeing as a business model that I mean, of course, there are a few heat as a service agreement projects as of now as well, but there are only a few. And we do see that this is going to pick up mainly because it just makes a lot of sense on all fronts for risk sharing and as well as to ensure that companies can focus on their core business areas as well. Of course, it comes with a few additional risks about contracting and the payment terms, etc. But with digitalization, of course, some of those challenges and with increasing availability of data within companies and monitoring, I think those are some of the areas that would get resolved as well. So I'm very, very positive about heat as a service business model to be picking up going forward. In terms of policy, I think very quickly, what we are seeing already is that there are some countries that are already incentivizing flexibility by demand side. And of course, for industries, it becomes a little bit tricky depending on the kind of processes they are. Stopping their processes, especially from the demand side, would incur a lot of losses, would hamper some of their equipment as well. So it depends on where it can come from in terms of demand side. But we do see policy changes in terms of flexibility being incentivized. We also think that a number of policy support that is coming industries' way is, of course, very result oriented and talking about having to show reduction in emissions, irrespective of which technology. So it's technology agnostic, at least the ones that we have seen across the globe, which is very promising. But in terms of industrial flexibility, I do see that this is going to pick up more. It's not really at present, it's not really a lever which provides a big incentive for companies to adopt a specific solution, but that's going to change slowly as we see pressures on the electricity grid and as we know that that the wait times are running into years in many parts of the world for additional capacity.
Okay, thanks a lot. Mathilde, so from your perspective, maybe also in reaction to Surbhi.
No, sorry. Maybe just briefly on the business model side, I think that there is heat as a service, but also energy as a service. I couldn't imagine that will also pick up. Then more really on the policy side, I mentioned briefly the fact that market access is not always a thing. I would expect that this has become a thing because of the growing amounts of electrified processes and also the problem we'll be facing with congestion more and more and in more countries. I think that this type of markets will need to be open at some point because we need to juggle congestion. I would also say that I have to say maybe sometimes I don't fully have the same experience that Surbhi, that regarding faster connection process or maybe like faster deployment for flex ready or flexible project, that's not necessarily something that we see in the countries where we are. I will expect this to change as well because like we need more flexibility in the system and we need to make sure that that flexibility can play a role in balancing supply and demand. So these are also policy, let's say, regulatory changes that I will expect, at least that I wish for. Let's see when this will happen.
Thank you very much. There are many questions in the Q&A box, so this is exciting. I'm going to try to cluster them, and I'm really sorry if I don't repeat your question in the exact words. For the sake of time, I'm going to try to make some themes. So I'm going to start with the disrupting core operation question. So basically, some industries might be hesitant to adapt their processes and to adopt flexibility due to concerns about disrupting core operations. So could you share examples, perhaps in the case studies you've looked at, Surbhi and Mathilde, among your business partners, of a sector that could actually reconcile the, let's say, process critical energy demand with grid flexibility?
I can go ahead, maybe, Surbhi, you can share another example. At some point I had a slide, I hope this one was showed on the screen, where I was showing like all the different sectors we work with. And this, it's quite a wide range of sectors. And I think this also shows that most of the time, like in every sector, you could try to find some flexibility. Something to be kept in mind is that most of the time we don't touch the core process of the factory or of the industry. For instance, we use the fan, we turn on and off the fan. In the industrial side, this is not part of the core processes. Or like with greenhouses, we use the light bulb, which are not also part of the core process. So most of the time we don't touch the core processes, but all the different assets that are around that. Also to be kept in mind that for balancing markets, and the length during which we're activated is actually really short and can be really, really short. We have people, absolutely not me, but I have colleagues that are specialized in doing that. They always go to the sites, they look at the processes, the different type of assets, and they can already tell you how many megawatts you could bid and the potential impact. And this is something where like we don't decide for the customers if they don't want to be activated, for instance, if they don't want us to place a bid on their behalf for a specific day, that's something we're obliged and forced to agree with and to take into account. So like this, I think that the impact on the production processes is actually quite limited.
Just to re-emphasize and quickly add a short point. Of course, for many processes, it is difficult to stop the core process. And Mathilde was saying that they don't touch the core process at all. I think this is something, at least in the case studies that we have looked at in projects where flexibility has been considered, is already where they have batch processes. So they are looking at in between those two batches, or looking at not touching the core process, but looking at additional functions that are additional processes that are running, and that if that those can be controlled or retimed. But yeah, for sure, fewer processes that are relevant for this.
Thank you. I'd like to ask another question about rising grid fees. So we know that in some parts of the world, including the EU, grid fees are on the rise. And how does that affect the business models for flexibility?
Go ahead.
Thank you. In our experience, at this point, not really. We don't see it as a concern that comes up when my colleagues from our more like commercial team or sales team talk to potential customers. So far, with the type of customers we have, it hasn't really been brought up as a problem. So I really I don't have first-hand experience, so I would rather not say anything wrong. But maybe Surbhi, you actually have first-hand experience.
I think in some markets, grid fees are sort of stopping companies in being more flexible because, of course, distribution utilities and electric utilities do incentivize a constant load because it helps them plan. So there are cases where we've heard that the grid fees is not is not in favor for us to really deviate from that constant load that we have. In terms of increasing grid fees, I think we did come across a project in Germany where, because of the revision in grid fees, that was something that became a problem for the commercials of that project. However, another thing that we had heard was that because the solution was combined with thermal energy storage, it helped them get access to reduced grid fees also because they were providing flexibility services. So that's one case study that we have heard.
Thank you for sharing. Now, turning a bit into the different technologies and how they would work, we have three questions that relate to different technologies. So one question is, do you have examples of a typical response time for industrial heat pumps? So how fast can they be turned on and off? More generally, how much time does industry need to activate flexibility after the activation signal? And finally, how do you see the participation of district heating in flexibility services?
On the response time of a heat pump, I'm sorry, I don't have the answer. But then regarding more the speed of response, to be kept in mind, so on the balancing market, you have a lot of different type of reserves. Let's say mainly 3, and depending on the countries, they have even let's say some specific ones. So you could say 4 or more. And the speed of response really varies. So if you look at primary between the Nordics and continental Europe, the speed of response is between less than a second and 1.5 seconds. So it's really, really fast. You need to be able to react really quickly. Then you also have FCR. So really, this is more continental Europe. So you need to be answering between 15 and 30 seconds, I believe. For secondary, it's more than 30 seconds. And then tertiary, it's 10 to 15 minutes. So depending on the market program in which you participate, the speed of response can vary greatly. And this is where you really need to match the market in which you want to participate with the asset you have and the flexibility and these technical characteristics of the assets. And I'm sorry, I forgot the third part of the question, actually.
District heating.
District
You look
heating.
at that, especially in the countries that have a district heating network.
Yeah, we looked at it in the Nordic, in Denmark and in Sweden, I believe. Actually, I could follow up on that because I don't want to say, and if it was before, I don't really recall the full thing. So, but maybe Surbhi, you.
I'm sorry, I
share more
wouldn't know the
information with
technical.
you, Marion.
No worries. I also read about it, and there's a couple of interesting publications. Now I haven't seen the financials of it. Would be quite interesting to dig up, maybe for a next Electrification Academy webinar. Now I have a question on greenhouse gas accounting, and maybe that's one for you, Surbhi. So companies active in flexibility markets will be interested to account these efforts as part of their carbon savings efforts. So how does that work specifically? How does the methods allow doing that?
You mean within the greenhouse gas accounting protocol?
Yes, in the GHS protocol, yes.
I wouldn't be 100% sure about the mechanisms within the protocol, but I think this is also where, when you tie up with an electric utility, it supports you to look at what part of the grid at what time you are moving away from grid and using your on-site renewables, or a mix of even grid and on-site renewables. And I think that's also where the electric utility can support you on looking at how much emissions you've saved because of that act. So I've seen this happen in partnership with electric utility, but I'm so sorry, but I wouldn't know the exact accounting principle within the GHG protocol on this.
Sure.
Maybe
The questions are, sorry, go ahead, Mathilde.
if I may to complement on that, it's something that we looked at internally because we were trying, Sympower is a, let's say, mission-driven company. So at some point we're like, yeah, actually, can we find out the impact on emissions, and we could not. It's something that we set aside because it's really, really difficult, and there are so many components that you need to take into account. That's really a difficult questions to answer. Like in practice, I mean, like.
Thank you. Yes, it's the questions we receive are very precise and also like in some cases relate to particular technologies or particular markets. So I'm not gonna ask you to reply to those questions right now. If you want to be active on the chat, please do so. Perhaps one question I would have is basically, which countries would you see as front runners in the flexibility services provided by industrial players? And perhaps that's a question to both of you.
I'm happy to start. From the experience that we've had, and this is in no way comprehensive, so I wouldn't say we've covered all locations, but at least the companies that we've seen take up these projects, we've seen these projects to be concentrated in mainly Germany, Spain, even the Netherlands, because they are offering, they do have some market mechanisms in place that support flexibility and provision of flexibility services. So at least these are the three within Europe. These are the three locations that we've seen these projects make commercial sense on the ground because of the flexibility services.
From my side, in Europe, but again, like Sympower work really as an aggregator, so that's a bit specific. But I would say that Finland has been one of the first countries to really open the different markets to demand sides, aggregated and independently aggregating demand sides. And then the UK is definitely also like nowadays, especially after the few changes that took place last year, and I hope will also happen in the next few weeks. I would say is also like a front runner, at least in terms of also market access, the type of technology that can participate, how easy it is to participate. And if I need to look outside of Europe, personal experience, I've been talking to people that have been doing the same thing that Sympower does, so aggregating demand response in the US, but far before us. So I would imagine that the US, some states have also like a particularly supportive framework.
Thanks a lot, Mathilde. So, I mean, we are closely coming to the end of our time together, and I wanted to take a few moments to reflect on the discussion we just had. So, I'd like to thank our two speakers again for their presentation and for also responding to the questions. There are many questions on the chat box, very specific questions as well. So feel free to look at these questions and provide a more specific answer if you have it. And in the meantime, I'm going to turn to my colleague Jaap and ask him to summarize what he learned from today's conversation. Jaap, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marion, and thank you, Mathilde and Surbhi, for your insightful presentation. So I learned a lot. So as said in the introduction, I'm focusing more on consumer flexibility. So the world of industrial flexibility is quite new, but I also heard quite a number of similarities. Maybe to start with heat, I learned how the heat demand is a very significant share of industrial carbon emissions. So electrifying that heat and then obviously being responsive to the power system with that electrified heat is a key lever in bringing down carbon emissions. At the same time, I heard the challenges of accounting for related emission savings from demand-side flexibility, whether that's industrial flexibility or consumer flexibility. I heard interesting use cases in some markets which are perfectly ripe in terms of technology to be implemented in other markets, but where the market entry barriers differ from country to country, even within the European Union. So although their national energy legislation is based on a single European framework, there are differences that now act as a barrier to quickly scale up solutions that have proven successful in one market to another market. And I think there's a similarity there to consumer flexibility as well. So what I've seen in my work is that successful EV smart charging services or heat pump flexibility service in one country cannot as easily expand into new markets as it should be. And I think that that's one of the vital lessons also in terms of industry and the flexibility inherent to the electrification of industry, that we need to look at ways to make sure that, at least within the European Union, this can be seen as a single market where it comes to flexibility services. So that means access to all different flexibility markets, the role of the independent aggregator in helping companies tap into the potential of their flexibility. And I think maybe to conclude, there's also still very much a need for education among actors to understand the potential of flexibility they have, both actors from industry to understand what processes do they have and what flexibility is provided actually by the technology they employ, but also on the grid side to know what technologies can be used to overcome grid congestion problems, how novel contract forms like flexible connection agreements can be applied to quickly allow industry to electrify and be flexible at the same time. So I've learned a lot about industrial electrification and the flexibility potentials. So thanks again also from my side to Mathilde and Surbhi. Back to you, Marion, for the closing words.
Sure. I mean, Mathilde, Surbhi, is there something you want to say before we close that webinar? Anything you want to add to Jaap's great summary?
Just a very quick point on sector coupling, which I think Jaap referred to in his summary remarks. I think there's also a big potential for ensuring how we utilize or optimize the use of electricity on the grid, and time it in a way that it's optimally utilized, because with increasing number of EVs being connected to the grid, as well as in demand for electrification increasing by industry, it is just very important to match that with the supply side. And a number of these other, for instance, the demand by industry is not so flexible, but it is the case with EVs, and hence if you can club them, there is a lot of benefit that comes out of sector coupling. We need more of those going ahead for sure.
Thank you. A lot of ideas for future Electrification Academy webinars. Mathilde, would you like to say a few words before we close?
No, but I really liked Jaap's summary. But yeah, a lot of food for thought, indeed. Let's see what's going to happen.
Thank you. So thanks again to both of you. So we're coming to the end of our time. We invite you to register to our mailing list and to be in touch for the next editions of the Electrification Academy. So thanks again and have a nice day, everyone. Bye bye.